Hey, all, welcome to the David and Brandon podcast. This is
Right.
season 1, episode 2, and we have with our guest today, Rich and Elisa Brown, who we've all known each other for quite a long time. I was actually an intern with Rich and Elisa back
in the day.
in 2001 in Peru when their kids were all really little. I was madly in love with my girlfriend at the time, soon to be fiance, who's now my wife, and I work her here in the Dominican. And so I just want to have everybody reintroduce themselves. David, you can do that again, and then have Rich and Elisa introduce yourselves.
Hello. I don't know if the Brandon and David podcast is the official name. Perhaps we'll open a poll and see what that becomes. But we'll that's the operating name right now. The reason it's called Brandon and David is because that was Brandon and I am David, so that works. I, along with my wife Aaliyah, are workers with Alliance Missions. We're here in Washington, D.C. We've been working the last few years to get up and running a ministry initiative to connect the deaf community with the work that we're doing throughout the Alliance family around the world to create equal opportunities of access to serve and get involved, and at the same time serving the diverse deaf communities around the world in meaningful ways. So that's the short intro of who I am. And now to our special guests. Go ahead.
We're special.
Very
Okay.
special.
Thank you. I'm Elisa, and this is Rich. We're the Browns, and we are celebrating 25 years as missionaries. We have always been in the region of Latin America. We were actually both born in Latin America.
That's
Rich
right.
was born in Ecuador, and I was born in Argentina. And we are working with Envision in South America. We have actually 5 bosses. We always tell people this. Actually, it's 4 now, right?
Ish.
Did we get to 4?
Yeah.
Okay, we have 4 bosses now. We have the U.S. Alliance, so Rich is paid by the Great Commission Fund. And then we have the Canadian Alliance. I'm paid out of the Global Advanced Fund. We're a mixed couple. Woo-hoo! And then we have Inca Link, which we started as a nonprofit in each of the countries that we work in. They have their own autonomous boards, but we're on those boards, and we have different values that make it Inca Link. Now, they don't give us any funds. We don't get paid by Inca Link, but they do help us with ministry funds, absolutely. And we also have to report to a board there. And then finally, Rich is the director of what used to be youth specialties, which is now E625, E625. We're working with leaders of 6-year-olds all the way to 25-year-olds, the new generations, trying to reach them. Our goal is to reach the 300 million youth of Latin America with Christ's irresistible love. So that's us. And we totally remember when Brandon was with us as just a little wee one. He was. It was highlights of our time.
That's
was
right.
Spending time with young, impressionable kids.
I think it turned out okay. So.
Oh my goodness, you did for sure.
I don't know if it's been put into the script yet, but we should definitely improvise. And before this is all said and done, ask for a memorable story of Brandon as an intern. So if you don't have one on the tip of your tongue, figure it out. We got other questions, but we should definitely add that one. Sorry to do that to you, Brandon.
Sure.
I'm kind of excited to hear what they have to say. So I do want to share one picture. I'm going to share screen here for mine. Let's see if we can get it pulled up here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we were all together. One doesn't want to come up. A couple years ago. And so we've all known each other quite a long time. This is when David and Aaliyah were in Mexico for quite a while. Here we go. This is us right here. We're all in Ecuador together. It was a super fun time. We all were working there as in part of Envision. So we all work with Envision. And this was our Latin America region. and which we love all these people in this picture. So
Oh yeah.
That's right. That was the Vision Life America team.
Good times. That was when we could get out of the house.
that's right, when we were allowed to leave. So
Look how close we're standing to one another.
I know.
Yeah. I think we were doing a challenge. Was that the tree stump that we all had to try to fit on this tiny little?
I think it was. Yeah. Yeah. So we've had a lot of fun times together over the years, and not just as an intern, but since then as well. So the question then is, how do I kill the screen sharing? Anybody know?
There's a stop share on the bottom.
Here we go. You can tell I don't know what I'm doing here.
At the bottom, I think there's
Where?
Or at the top.
Or at the top it says, there's the green button, you're viewing, ran another screen.
Stop share. Got it.
Yay.
So we wanted to just kind of get started, just to ask, how are you guys doing during all this craziness with the coronavirus personally, your family? How are you guys handling all this?
Well, we have 3 adult kids that are living with us now. They've been evacuated either from university or they came to live with us as they study their master's program. So our second daughter, Michela, came back from Peru to study education, her master's degree in education. She's living with us. And then our son Josiah is studying his master's online, and he's also living with us while we're on home assignment. And then our daughter Alexa, who's at University of Central Florida, was evacuated from her dorm room and is living with us too. So we're renting a place in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it's a nice little 2-bedroom, so we're nice and cozy and enjoying our time together. 5 of us in the small place, but enjoying it. We're doing well.
It really actually has been fun because we thought we were going to be empty nesters, and our calendar was completely filled. We weren't even going to rent a place.
Yeah.
We were going to just be gone.
Be on the road the whole year.
So the COVID has totally changed everything for us, and it's actually been a great change. And we played games at night, and it's been good.
Nice. Here in the DR, we are basically on lockdown. We can't really leave our apartment except to get groceries. We have a curfew from 5 p.m. to 6 a.m. That'll probably go through the end of the month, maybe just slightly longer. But is it that extreme there? Are you guys able to get out at all?
Actually, yesterday, the county next to ours set a curfew, I think it's for 9 p.m. till 5 a.m. or something like that. And so, that's new. But we've actually been self-quarantining the same way. We actually we've been doing a 30-day challenge of no spending money except for bills that we have to pay, monthly bills. And so no groceries or anything. And so no going out to eat or anything and staying in the house. So we've really, other than going between our beach house and here, which is the house that we bought this year, right before all this happened, great time to buy. So that's basically all we've done. I had shingles for the last 2 weeks. So I'm still getting over that. So I haven't really moved much.
No, we were thinking maybe his immune defenses were down. So we decided let's not go out.
Our son Josiah goes out almost every day to work. He's working at Papa John's Pizza as a delivery guy. And so he comes in and kind of takes his shower and washes his clothes and then comes and greets us. So we've been kind of like DR in that sense, being kind of in and not going out.
But that was self-imposed more. There's people out on the street they do walks. You can go out for exercise. A lot of people biking, but our beaches are closed. The pools are all closed. It's gorgeous weather, but we're not allowed to enjoy it.
Well, we last time we talked quite a bit about grief. We've all been dealing with grief and the losses that we've experienced. But I think today we wanted to talk a little bit more about fear. Probably everybody's dealing with fear. It's like a cultural shift, really, in some ways. And we've all done that. Living overseas, we've experienced the fear of shift and change, new. So how are you guys dealing with the fear over this? How are your people dealing with fear? Because I think we're all wrestling with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of levels of fear, right? There's the fear of change, and we've all been absolutely forced to change our regular routine. And then there's the fear of how long is this going to last, and the not knowing, the adapting, but not knowing until when we have to adapt. Fear, are we going to run out of toilet paper? Apparently that's a big fear. Those kind of things. There's different levels, and especially for people, I know that in the past I've experienced anxiety. There's also the fear of fear and getting into that cycle of, oh my goodness, like I'm going to be anxious and I won't be able to get out of it because I can't do the things that I have been able to do in the past to get out of those cycles. So we have seen it in different levels. You know, all our staff, the missionaries that work with us, they're human. We're all human. And so we have absolutely amped up the communication because for some reason that feeling of we're all in this together does help with the fear. The isolation can really feed into that anxiety and fear. And so when we try to stay connected, doing these kinds of things, you guys are great. It really helps. It puts a name to the emotions that we're feeling. And then once we name it, we can
Own up to it, kind of.
own up to it. And then it's the first step of working through fear, because, you know, fear produces only awful things. Fear produces sin and ugliness. We need to really work on the getting rid of fear and letting love reign, and then working through that base of love. We've had to work with a lot of our international workers with the fear because they have been truncated. They can't get to people that we know depend on us for
Food.
like survival.
Yeah.
And that burden, and it gets in your mind, and there's that feeling of impotence. There's nothing we can do right now. Most of our people are on severe lockdown as well. You cannot go out unless you have permission or you have a purpose, like the doctors or whatever. So
Can you share some of the context? Brandon and I obviously know what you guys do and how expansive the work that you're interconnected with is. Last week when we were talking with Tony, we jokingly thought that maybe 2 or 3 people would watch this. Come to find out, maybe a couple hundred people did. Those numbers are inconclusive. As I already confessed before we started recording, I might have added a number of watches to see how many people had watched it as I clicked it every day last week. So 10 to 15 of those views might have come from me checking, but nevertheless, there are maybe 100 people that will listen to you guys. What's the context of you're talking about? Different workers, different places. Again, obviously I know, but for those that don't, can you just give some context? Because I love what you're saying, and even have follow-up questions on that as you lead through it. But what are you talking about here?
Yeah, so we have the Alliance asked us to start InkaLink over 13 years ago now. And the idea was, before Envision they asked us to start InkaLink. We were having a lot of short-term teams coming down as we were transitioning out of countries, Peru and Ecuador and Colombia specifically. And so, but we kind of were bridging that gap between the mission pulling out and still staying connected to the national churches of these countries we were leaving. And so I know Brandon is doing some of that in the DR too, as people are leaving, bridging that gap and still having a missionary presence, but not in the same form, not as a field, but having teams come in and helping with building projects and helping with social work, with common services and other things. And so InkaLink was born. And so we started InkaLink separate from the Alliance, but part of the Alliance as well. And so they asked us to start it, we did, and then Envision came later and we were kind of grafted into Envision as well. And so when InkaLink was started, we knew that God had put this passion of reaching the 300 million youth in Latin America with Christ's love on our hearts. And so we started to do that. And as we started to do that, we were working with nationals in Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia, but then missionaries who already had their support raised independently of the alliance or us came to us and said, we have the same vision you do. Can we work for you? We're like, no, there's too many missionary organizations. Go through the alliance, find somebody else. And they said, well, we've been looking and we believe that God wants us to work with you guys. And so one of our mode of operation with IncoLink is it comes from the book Experiencing God, which it's an older book that said, instead of making your strategies and saying, hey, God, come bless my strategy, we squint our eyes to see where God is working. And we say, squint our ears to hear where God is working, to see and hear what he's saying. And God was saying, hey, yes, we want missionaries to work with IncoLink as well. So now we have 29 missionaries that raise their support through IncoLink. Half of them or more don't have any connection to the alliance, but they're doing alliance work on the field, many of them. And we have Baptist and non-denominational Assemblies of God and just all kinds of people coming down and saying, we want to work for you. We believe in your vision. And so we have these 29 missionaries. When Lisa's talking about our staff and missionaries, international workers that are going through this transition with all of us in fear as well, that's kind of the context. So they're working in Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Honduras, and Costa Rica. And we're opening 10 new countries in 10 years, looking for more people that'll join us to open these different countries from 2020 to 2030. Some of the fear, though, that we've been talking about is fear of finances. Like our biggest fear has been, what are we going to do? We just bought a house. We're going to rent out. Can't find renters. How are we going to cover our costs? And so a financial fear is very real. A family and people getting sick, us getting sick, the coronavirus, those are real fears that everybody's dealing with. Or is it what some people are saying? It's not that bad. We should just go out and let's get immune to it. So there's all these conflicted issues in the fear process. And so those are some of the things that our staff and people are working through.
But I think we would both agree that the biggest fear is the responsibility that we feel to vulnerable people when life is normal. When everything is going great, these people are already struggling to survive. Yeah. And now with this pandemic, all our communication is cut off. We can't go to they don't have internet for us to call them up, make sure they're okay. And so there's a constant battle inside our mind of what are we going to do? And then we have to go back to our roots of faith. Yeah. The faith walk that we took when we said, we're going to leave everything we know and go to another country and do whatever God asks us to do. In the same way, right now, we're all working through how do we die to self and quiet those fears in our mind and go to God's love and trusting him that in the end, there are no surprises. He is the one that holds the future and every day in the hand. And he loves those people that we love and serve more than we do.
That's right.
And that's something that we have to grapple, get in our minds. Remember, as great as our compassion is, God's compassion is so much greater.
That's right. And we're seeing, some of our missionaries, they're nationals that are missionaries in other countries. So like our Corbin, Lisa sings in the band Corbin, and they've been at Life Conference, and many of the viewers may know them from the different tours they've done. But several of their band members are missionaries, one in Honduras, one in Ecuador. And one of them is thinking they have the virus right now. And they're quarantining from their own children, and they have some of the symptoms. And one of the people that he was delivering food to his ministry of these kids that can't eat, the person who donated the food was a doctor who got sick and died with coronavirus. So he's worried. And so these fears are very real, and we're seeing it impact. In IncoLink, what we're trying to do is feed the people. Number one thing is, how can they get food? We actually have figured out from all of our ministries throughout the 6 countries, what is it that the biggest needs are, and it's eating. People need to eat. And so we're trying to get food to them, and it's expensive. It's about $3,800 a week that we're trying to find. It's 420 families that it comes like $7 a week per family. We're trying to figure out how to keep these people alive.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I posted last night about the economy in the Dominican.
Yes,
Basically, a third of their GDP could collapse.
Yeah.
And I feel that fear of like being unable to do anything, stuck in the apartment, I can't leave and go bring food. But one of the encouraging things is I'm sure we all experience as Alliance missionaries, the national churches, the national church in the DR, and I'm sure many other places have responded so incredibly. I still talk with a lot of the pastors on the phone or WhatsApp, and their local responses are doing what they can, and they've been amazing. So, but yeah, there's that fear, like, oh, I'm in, there's nothing I can do. But God is still working, absolutely still working, and despite all that's going on, we're not the Savior, right? He is.
Right. Yeah. That's right. And God is working through the church, and the other side of fear, it's not the opposite, is excitement. Mm-hmm. I'm excited for the church globally through this pandemic. Why? We've been forced out of the buildings for the first time since the book of Acts, which they didn't have buildings yet. And we're forced to serve in new ways and find creative ways. We have some of our national pastors in Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, who have never used the internet. And all of a sudden, for the first time, they have to figure out how their congregation is going to be pastored, how they're going to be trained. And they're figuring out how to use the internet. Praise God. Mm-hmm. And so it's bringing the church together in a different way. And I'm excited about that piece of it. The other, the piece of the fear and what you're talking about, the national churches, our national church in Ecuador is lambasted right now. In Guayaquil, Ecuador, they're putting body bags with dead bodies on the streets because they don't have enough room in the morgues. In Guayaquil, they don't know. It's terrible. CNN News has shown this, and it's all over the place. We're seeing people, and now it's hitting our churches and our pastors. The president of the Alliance of Ecuador, David Mutre's wife has coronavirus, and I think 2 of his kids have it. And, he's also the president of CLAW, of Latin American Alliance. And so we're starting to see pastors, their wives, families that are being affected by this, bodies that are being left in the streets because they don't know what to do with them. They don't want to be contagious themselves. They love their family member, but they don't know what to do. They're not able, some of them are dying in the hospitals, and they're not able to even say goodbye to them. So it is, worldwide, this is a reason for fear. But Lisa and I love that song that says, I'm no longer a slave to fear. Mm-hmm. I am a child of God. And if we remember who we are in Christ, then he dissipates that fear.
That's good. One of the things that we learned about in most all Alliance missionaries, at least for the last number of years, have been going to training before we go to the field called MTI. And they have this kind of bridge analogy because we're really going through a shift in culture. If it really does affect, at least in our case here, a third of the GDP, we're going to have some significant long-term changes. Yeah. And so how do we help people in the U.S. church and our churches where we serve go through that fear, that transition? They use the analogy at MTI, the training. You're walking across the bridge from one place to another. And that middle, that suspension bridge that sways and goes crazy is scary. So how do we help our people to transition that and manage that fear? I don't know if you have...
Absolutely. I think experience and going back to remembering when God has been with us in uncertain times. That was a big Old Testament principle, to raise an altar of remembrance, to remember what God has done. Up until now, my God has been with me. Those kinds of practices are so good for us when we're walking across a swaying bridge and we're feeling that unsettled and scared. The fear that comes with that is one of the most effective exercises, is to go back and remember God has been faithful in the past. He has done things that I didn't think he would do. For example, the very coast of Ecuador that we're talking about in 2016 had a terrible earthquake, and one of our alliance churches was greatly affected. It was in the city of Puerto Viejo, and 300 buildings were destroyed. So many people died, and yet the alliance church was under construction, so it remained pretty much unscathed, and it became a refuge for that whole community.
Families.
And the very pastors that are right now suffering were the ones that were that light, so much so that the president of the country came and said, I see what you guys are doing. Thank you for not letting fear rule and actually serving the people. So we need to remember God is so good. He's so faithful. Try to build those altars in your mind to combat the fear, and remember God is with us and his purposes are greater and we're safe in his hands.
There's a lot of steps and people, personalities are different, but one way that we found to deal with that fear in the middle of the bridge is writing it down. Like Lisa was saying, name it. So write down, what fears do I have right now and what are they linked to? My fears are with finances, or my fears are with getting sick, or whatever the fear is, writing it down. And then remembering, like Lisa was saying, who's the one that called you to this? Who's the one that is with you always to the very end of the age? And have Jesus walk through with you in that fear and watch that fear go away. And then there's community. You can't do it by yourself either. Some people, just mentally, they're able to do that. I can't do that. But if I've got fear, I need to rely on somebody else. And so that may be a Zoom call. That may be a phone call. That may be my spouse or somebody else. But others need, I need personally, sometimes that it's even greater than that. It's calling a friend. I've been calling our friends or some of our friends and reconnecting. And then third, even a deeper level, is a Christian psychologist. We're meeting weekly with a Christian psychologist and saying, hey, are there any blind spots in this that I'm missing? And making sure that we're relying on God, yes, but also the tools that God has given us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate your guys' encouragement. As you're talking, I find myself reflecting and processing, and based off of what you're saying, what comes to mind for me personally is, while these are uncertain times, while these are unprecedented times, I have faced uncertainty before.
That's right.
And where I have felt comfort and peace, the source of that, theologically, I believe, is unchanging.
Yes.
We call it the immutability of God, if you want to go there. But he is unchanging. And so though we are facing a new uncertainty, I have uncertainties past that I can reflect on. So your invitation, as we do see described and practiced throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament too, is that remember. I love that invitation. Slow down, stop. And that's kind of the behavior required that is so difficult at times, that we have to slow down and stop, where friends, even professionals, can really help you do that. Because when I remember, I feel a great sense of comfort. And this correlates back to the grief conversation as well that we were having with Tony last week, and that I've personally continued to process. But I really appreciate that. That's wisdom, and I'm thankful, because right now in this moment, I needed that. So thanks.
Good.
Thank you.
So good.
And we're also realizing that the world has a lot to offer us in this. Let's not forget that the world and science is also has things to teach us. And one of the things that science is telling us for fear, or to combat fear, is the physical aspects of that. Number one, we need to sleep well. Number two, we need to eat better.
Yeah.
If we eat well, we get the nutrition that we're supposed to get. It's going to help our minds not go to fear and our hearts not be in fear. And third is exercise. And so that's another thing we're trying to routine. Science tells us that if you have routine, it helps you get through those mental hiccups that you could have with anxiety or fear. And so These different things that we can put into place will help us as well. They're external things. It's not the spiritual side necessarily, but again, if we're supposed to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, let's look at each of those areas in this pandemic, since we're stuck at home anyway, and let's see how we're doing. How am I doing in my mind? What am I doing to challenge my mind? Am I just sitting there watching the news all day and freaking out? Or am I actually exercising my mind? We do something every day with our kids with someone from England who puts on these questions that you have to try to figure out. What's his name? Does anybody know? Jimmy Carr. And so he online every day on YouTube, and he tells you the 10 questions, and we all sit around, have our notebooks, try to figure out the answer. And then he gives you the answer, and you're always like, oh, I wish I'd remembered that, or whatever.
It takes all 5 of us.
Yeah, but it's something, it's a routine that we do every day that helps as well. And so those kind of things mentally, but also spiritually, yes, with God and with scripture, with prayer, with worship, and also with our soul. You know, what is it that energizes us and gives us our soul? So body, soul, mind, and strength physically as well, making sure we have those things.
I'm reading this great book, Abba's Child. Oh my goodness, it's rocking my world. And
Is it by?
It's
Brennan Manning, right?
Yeah, Brennan Manning. So good. Those kind of things, look for things that are going to help you also in your thought patterns and you know, holding captive those thought patterns.
That's key.
Yeah.
That's good. So just to move us along, I don't want to be on super long today, but just tell us a little bit too. You talked about it some, but your desire to feed, you know, you've got communities that are needing food, and how are you guys responding as best you can? We feel like we can't do much, but you know, there are things we're able to do. And so how are you guys addressing it? How is your team addressing the situation? How ministry really changed for you guys? Because
for us personally, we started recording all of our sermons because we're on a missionary tour, and we send them to the churches we were going to be at. We did small group, videos as well, 5 to 10 minutes, Audubon stuff and all that.
It's when you realize all the ums that you say,
Yeah,
and how much I move my hands when I talk. It's like
Lisa's very Argentine, so she's very.
Terrible.
That's what we're drinking, by the way, mate today, the Argentine mate. And
so good for you. No
so
sugar.
good for you, yeah. So personally, we're dealing with it in some of those ways, but as a ministry, as Inca Link, we asked our people, what is the biggest need you guys have right now? And they started saying, Nate Tabi is one of our missionaries in Quito, Ecuador, that runs Comunidad Project. It's a soccer ministry. You'd think soccer would have nothing going on right now. Everything's closed. He says, but you don't understand. Some of my guys, they work, and the kind of work they had is not, with official receipts and things. They're someone begging on the streets, or they have no income right now, and so they can't eat. So he was going every other day to the grocery store. Men are allowed to go one day, women another day, and he would go and stand in line for 2 or 3 hours at the grocery store, go in and buy all the food he could, and take it to the players through Uber Eats. That's another version of Uber Eats called Globo, and some of his players actually are the transportation. So he's helping pay the players that are taking the food to the different players. But it's a reality. So we started asking all of our missionaries, all of our project leaders, what are the biggest needs and what's the budget to not buy extravagant food, but the minimum food. And that's where we came to this, $7 a day per family that we're trying to cover. So we're raising money for that. We're praying about it. We're interviewing them and asking them, what are the needs today? They're sending videos back and pictures of how they're handing out the food.
And then we also have some that are completely separated by countries. We have Hoka and Alex in Canada that are completely separated from their ministry in Peru, their discipleship ministry with at-risk kids, and that's super hard, but they're trying to see God's purpose in this. And then we have a couple, the whole family that are in Georgia. They had been traveling around. It was supposed to be just a month, and they ended up getting stuck there. They're part of our bonsai ministry that is also working with at-risk families. So we just try to encourage them and again do that faith walk as they say, what's my role now as I'm quarantined here in Georgia or in Canada when all my ministry is in a whole different country?
Yeah, and we did, one of the things we had to do right away was we had to evacuate a bunch of short-term teams that we had. So we had a short-term team that was it was 25 Canadians in Peru, Trujillo, Peru, and they were supposed to leave on a Friday, and they were like, let's go ahead and stay. They chose to stay, and their group decided to stay, youth group. And so Sunday, the country closed their borders, and they were stuck there for another week. The Canadian government embassy helped get them out. And then on, special planes and everything. And then we had another team from the States, our Link Year program, our gap year. They were supposed to finish up in May, and same thing, the U.S. said, this is the time to get them out. And so we had to make the tough decision.
They were like, now or never.
Yeah, and so we made the tough decision of getting them home, but they also, through the embassy, were able to get out of Ecuador when the borders were closed and everything too. So there's all these dynamics to what the ministry is looking like. But our number one thing, make sure people are fed and eating so that they can survive. Our number two thing, make sure that they're healthy. The fear that they're dealing with, that they're dealing with it well and in a healthy way. And then third, how can they grow spiritually through this and see the ways of serving in a new light?
Well, I had one, I guess, final question before we close with David. Did you want to ask or anything or add anything before we wrap up?
Thank you for asking, Brandon. The short answer is no. The long answer is yes, of course, because I love Rich and Lisa, and I would love to know every story that they could tell, because not only are they great workers, they're great storytellers. Mm-hmm. But one of our goals for episode 2 was to be a little bit shorter. So I will resist the temptation and defer to you.
Well, I just want to ask, as you look at long-term ministry, what is maybe an exciting new opportunity that's going to open up because of this?
Well, go ahead.
I'll let Rich answer, but I will say he referred to it a little in saying there is an excitement when the building is not an important thing anymore, and we're going back to being the body of Christ on a daily basis to the community around us, because how do we do that? It's exciting when God is asking us to listen to him and adapt to him. That's where you see fruit. So there is that excitement. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're so excited because the church will never be the same. And every 500 years, there's this reformation. There's a church history that shows that every 500 years, there's this kind of, let's go back to the roots of the early church and do things more like the early church. And Martin Luther was the last one to do it 500 years ago. And we wondered, it didn't seem like the church was adapting and reforming as much as it needed to. But this is going to make us reform. This is going to make us remember what we're about. This is going to make us put away a little bit of the religiosity and the legalism, and let's go back to really, what is it that Jesus wants us to do? How does he want us to live? And I think this is not just in North American context, but our Latin American context as well. People are starting to realize, hey, it's less about the 40 to an hour, 40-minute monologue. It's more about being a body. So how can we serve each other in this? And how can we grow together? And this is going back, I think, a little bit to the priesthood of all believers. We're empowering all believers again. It's not about the ranking of who's the senior pastor, the lead pastor, and the peons down at the bottom that sometimes our churches across the world have kind of emulated from our missionaries in the past. I think now we're starting to say, hey, we all have the Holy Spirit in us. Let's now continue to grow together in a setting like this. And that's exciting to me for the church globally, for Inklink specifically. We're excited that we're going to open 10 new countries in 10 years because the need is greater now than ever. And God is going to be calling more people than ever. I think we can have a reformation of missions again. People who are saying, hey, it wasn't so bad. I was quarantined for 2 months or whatever in my home, And I thought I wouldn't be able to survive if I stopped doing what I was doing every day for my life. And I was able to stop and actually hear God say, I need to go and pick up and go. And the needs are great all over the world. And so I think we're going to have a resurgence in people called to missions. And this is a golden opportunity for us to see that happen.
I appreciate the example you guys are setting by thinking of the most vulnerable. I know that's always been something that's woven into your work in your ministries to care for the least of these. I know even myself in these moments, the temptation is to think about what I need to do. Think about what is the challenge I'm facing, the financial challenge, the physical, whatever. I got to get to the grocery store because the groceries are going out. While many of us can turn inward and think about how this is affecting us and thinking about how we need to make it through, you are exemplary in turning our focus to the least of these, the most vulnerable. And I appreciate that. And I hope that that's something that comes through in all of the ways you interact with people and share your stories, what you're doing, what God's doing in Inkalink and through Inkalink throughout Latin America, because as we journey through this unprecedented season together, we need to have that tenderness to think about the most vulnerable, because obviously that was a example that was set to us by Jesus. So how can we do that? Thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing those stories, because again, I know as I'm sitting here listening, my focus is going to the right places. So I appreciate all that you're sharing that way.
Thank you. There was an Alliance missionary, Mark Kruger from Africa, that posted on Facebook, hey, we're all trying to get this money from the government, $1,200 per household and all this kind of stuff. Wouldn't it be great if we not only tithed of that money to the Great Commission Fund, but actually, if we don't really need it, we either give it away to those who do need it or give it to the Great Commission Fund to help support our missionaries around the world who are actually feeding the people that are on the ground. This is it's a different time, but wouldn't that be cool to instead of hoard, and we actually, one of the things, here's a little secret, we never bought the toilet paper when everybody was panicking about it. We still haven't. At the beginning of March, everybody's panicking and it went missing. And our kids kind of led the way on this and said, hey, let's not panic about it. We don't need to freak out and go hoard. And then we went to the grocery store and saw no toilet paper. And then we started to get nervous and we're like, dang it, we're going to end up without toilet paper. And we haven't bought toilet paper since February before all this happened. And we're still okay. We're using the 3 squares, no more squares than 3. And we still have enough. Maybe God is multiplying it like the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I don't know.
I was going to say, are there rolls of toilet paper on your lawn in the morning, enough for the day that you collect in a basket? Yeah. And then 2 days worth on Saturday. Is that how it's working for you guys?
Maybe that's how it's working, but we
have what we need.
We have what we need.
That's right.
What we need.
And I mean, next week we may be out, but the point is, we don't need to panic. We can work, and same thing with our food. We're going through all of our cupboards and finding we've had this in there for probably 2 months. We need to eat this. So we're going to eat all the food in the house before we go shopping again. So, that's kind
so
of
funny. Aaliyah and I have been doing the same thing. We're opening up the cupboard and we're like, well, we bought this at one point in time thinking that we'd use it. I guess this is the quarantine challenge. At one point, I thought this jar of curry was going to make a great dinner 6 months ago. So now's the time to cook it up. It's funny.
Yeah.
Well, thanks guys for your time. I really appreciate it. And I think your challenge, even for me personally, and like, how are we going to use this stimulus check or whatever they're calling it? It was a great challenge because there is so much need around the world, Latin America, really all over. And so it's a great challenge that, if we can live not in fear, not hoard, I think God can really use us and use those funds for His glory. So I love you all. Thank you for And hopefully,
Yeah, we love you guys. It was great talking to you.
Keep up the good work.
all right. Let's see it.